Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pediatric Speech Sister Show Network. I am so excited to have here Dr. Yvette Hyter. I had Dr. Hyter come on the show, or really, I asked in a fangirl, non fangirl way for her to come on the show because I am just such a fan, Dr. Hyter, of your work, especially when it comes to
Oh,
DEI
thank you.
and speech language pathologist. I think that you are a spearhead, and there is so much that we can learn about you. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and read your bio and then we can get
Sure.
started on today's chat.
Sounds good.
Amazing. Yvette D. Hyter, PhD, CCC-SLP, BCSCL, Asher Honors, Professor Emerita in Western Michigan University, has worked in speech language and hearing since 1984. She focuses on trauma and culturally responsive practices. She has co authored a textbook on culturally responsive methods and has published an edited textbook on language research and post traumatic stress. Her work also focuses on pragmatics in African American children and children with exposure to trauma. She owns Language and Literacy Practices, LLC, which provides culturally, linguistically, and trauma responsive and globally sustainable consultations and courses for educational agencies and a trauma institute for speech language clinicians and educators. She will soon offer caregiver coaching for caregivers who want more strategies to support their children's social pragmatic communication. She is a founding member and co managing editor of the Journal of Critical Studies of Communication and Disability and works to transform scholarship, practice, and policy using critical science, equity, and social justice. Wow. Is there anything that I missed that you would like to add?
I don't think so. Not at this time. Yep. Thank you.
Absolutely. There is so much to celebrate you for. But let's go ahead and get into our conversation today. Can you tell us a bit about your why?
My why. So the things that kind of light me up, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
as a clinician, one of the things that what your audience members might not know this, but I started off working in the public schools as an itinerant speech language clinician. Most of my work life as a clinician was in preschool. So even after I started working as a university faculty member, I still worked in the preschools. When I was working on my doctorate, I still worked in the preschools. And so one of the places that just really, as a clinician, lights me up is working with children in the preschools. And my focus of intervention always focused on social pragmatic communication. And so one of the things that's just really beautiful is when you have a child who's struggling to engage in social interactions with his or her peers, and you scaffold them to gain access to this play, to these conversations, to these interactions, and then you can step back and they're able to do it on their own. That's just amazing to me. Children who are in preschool are so open and honest, and they're so ready to learn. Um, it's just I just love that age, and that they're just so willing to try new things. So that lights me up as a clinician. As a scholar, excuse me, as a scholar, I look at research as being a puzzle. I'm a puzzler. I love puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, crossword puzzles, number puzzles, you name it. If it's a puzzle, I want to try to do it. And for me, engaging in research, asking that, finding the question to ask, the right question to ask, looking through all the literature, making the connections between what you're reading, that's like doing a puzzle. And it's just so exciting. And when I'm working with students who are working on their thesis, people have this idea that research is some big, insurmountable task. But if you break it down into these little pieces and then look for the ways that these pieces fit together, it's just, I love it. I just love it. And as an educator, I love it when the students get that aha moment, right? You introduce a concept or you're talking about something or you're discussing a reading with the students, and then you can see literally that something happens where there's a connection that's made. That really just keeps me going. And finally, just as a regular person, not professor, not doctor, just Yvette, if there's music involved, everything is better. I grew up immersed in music. I play two instruments. Um, well, piano I grew up on, but I don't play that as diligently as I do the violin. I consider myself a violinist. I was always in orchestras and community orchestras and the choirs and even now just any type of music, any genre of music, if it's just that's my peace. That's my peace place. So all of those things keep me ticking and keep me excited and engaged in different ways in the field and in my life.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the efforts that you've placed into our field. I love that you let us know what your favorite hobbies are when it comes to playing instruments. Do you incorporate that at all in your clinical work?
I haven't because I've had this really, um, how do you say it? It's just kind of a strange relationship. I love the violin. I love playing the violin, but I am not a confident player, right? So I've been playing for over 50 years. So I can play, but if in my mind, I feel like I can play so much better when I'm not playing in public,
Yes.
when I'm not playing in front of people. So I think with that kind of struggle, I've been really reluctant to bring it into my practice or into my teaching. So I haven't. But there's who knows? There's always the possible opportunity.
It could be a bucket list thing too.
Right.
It could be a bucket list thing.
Right.
Well, Dr. Hyder, let's get right into the nitty gritty of today. When I reached out to you, and we have had a little bit of a series where we got to talk to Dr. AC Goldberg and
Mhm.
Jordan Carroll and PTSD SLP Rachel Archambault about politics and speech language pathology. And it has become such a touchy subject, especially in the past, ooh, really in the past 8 years, right?
Mhm.
So I wanted to bring you on this show because you have an amazing book that you mentioned, Culture Responsive Practices in Speech Language Pathology. So there's one specific, what do you call that? Project assignment within that book called the positionality statement. And I think that you'd better explain it than I can. Can you let us know a bit about what that is and why it's important?
Sure. I'm just going to say one little thing before I get to that.
Please.
That is culturally responsive practices of speech, language, and hearing sciences. We
Mm.
deliberately didn't use pathology because it's kind of like ableist language. So we deliberately
Mm.
didn't use that. I just want to, highlight that. But in terms of the positionality statement, um, typically people conceptualize it, and I think even in this text, in the second edition of the text, I conceptualize it this way. But I've thought better of it. So I've changed my conceptualization of it, and I'll talk about both of those conceptualizations. So it's typically conceptualized as clinicians or scholars or educators, whatever your role is, identifying what your various identities are. So for me, I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm a professor, I'm also a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a musician, I am an artist, I do textile art. So I have, it's like have all these different identities. Some of the identities put me in positions of marginalization, like in academe. being a Black woman who focuses on critical perspectives is marginalizing, right? And others put me in positions of privilege, being a woman in my mid 60s, retired, traveler, those put me in positions of privilege. So that's the way it's usually conceptualized. However, there's this article by I can't remember her first name, Boveda and Anima, and I can send you the reference after. It's an article about like reconceptualizing positionality, and what they're talking about in this article, I think, is 2023, so it's only a couple of years old. And what they are talking about in this article is to go beyond just looking at the the clinicians or the researchers or the educators' identities, but also to look at what is our relationship to the systems of power. And so looking at what are our relationships to the positions of power, how do we um, uh, con- how do we not just how does it affect us, but when we look at our relationship to the systems of power, we take ourselves out of the middle of it. How do these systems of power impact the groups that and individuals that we're working with, who are our care partners, right? And it's not about us anymore. It's about how do we provide an environment, context, intervention, assessment, support in ways that are not that dismantle those systems of power, even if it's between us, right? So we need to be, um, it removes us from the center, puts people who are marginalized that we're working with in the center, and then we become more aware of these systems of power. And it's something that we should be always thinking about, reviewing. So I have these marginalized identities, true. But when I'm working with a client who is a member of the LGBTQIA community, who has a disability, they're marginalized in ways that I'm not marginalized. And I'm privileged because, one, I'm the clinician, I'm the professor, I'm the whoever, right? And so we need to constantly be evaluating what we're doing and reevaluating not our positionality statement, but our positions, our positioning in relationship to the systems of power with regard to the individuals that we're supporting or who are our care partners. Does
Thank
that
you.
make sense?
It
Uh-huh.
does, and thank you so much for that description too. I wanted to follow up with that because in the book, you and your co-author, Dr. Salas Province, were also very open about your political views.
Hmm.
And when I brought this assignment to the attention of undergrad students last year, it was met with resistance because of the fact that I was encouraging them to list their political views. So, can you tell us a bit more about why it's necessary for us to even discuss politics or even be open about it?
Yeah, I want to start by talking about how I define politics because, you know, often it's thought about as being something like following the rules of the government, or somehow we're being governed, or how the government impacts us. But I see it as going much further than that, that it is really an exercise of power. And so if you're saying, well, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to be political, you're usurping your ability to exercise your own power in the interest of your group or yourself or the people that you're advocating for. And there are different um, ways of thinking about politics, but this politics, if we think about it I'm imagining a big circle, just like, so that's the context. And that context includes these social structures, history, economics, the ecology, culture, social relationships, for example. And these social structures are systems and that are kind of like these systems or norms about the way society operates, right? In the United States, there's a certain way that economics operates, right? Capitalism is the model that's used in the United States. And socialism might be the model used in some other countries. But that those social structures have ways of creating unequal power relations and maintaining those unequal power relations. And so even though we might be caught up in that bubble of all those social structures, we still have, even individuals we have the opportunity to exercise our power in ways that can benefit um, us, our people, or the people we're advocating for. And so I think that all of us should be political, because even when we decide not to say anything, not to speak up, not to stand for something, um, that's also being political. So being silent is also being political, not using your power in ways that you could use it for good. Um, so did I answer your question?
You did, you
Okay.
did. Thank you, thank you. So, if and just to reiterate, and if I'm hearing you correctly, it seems like you are saying that exercising your power is a positive thing.
Oh yeah.
Yes, because a lot of times, and what's also mentioned in your book is, of course, misuse of power.
Yes, absolutely.
So
Hmm.
I think that it's lovely that you gave that explanation, that it is also great to exercise your power, but there are healthy ways to do it, and there are healthy ways that it can create harmony within our workplace settings.
Exactly. It can create harmony. Of course, we all know the examples, right, of the abuse of power and that marginalizes. And that's going to be that. I mean, that's a part of life. And as a critical social scientist, that's like part of the assumption that I have. I just assume that there's conflict, right? That there
Mhm.
are groups that have and groups that don't. The groups that have want to keep the groups that don't have from getting, that there's this conflict. And part of my role in all of my different roles, my role is to try to dismantle those unequal power relations and make things more equitable, make things more just. Um, and if I can do that, dismantling, even in my little clinic room, between me and the care partner I'm working with, between me and a student, between me and a colleague, um, that's the good kind of politics, right? To
Mhm.
exercise your power in that way.
That's very powerful. Thank you. I wanna, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I do want to get on to the rest of the questions. But I did tell you that I was going to go off on a tangent, so I thank you
Yes.
so much for meeting me where I am. So, if I could ask, I know we talked a bit about self reflection.
Mhm.
So, how does self reflection on values and political views play into the ethical responsibilities of a clinician?
Well, I want to say a little bit about self reflection and then kind of push us to think more about critical self reflexivity.
Ooh,
They
thank you.
sound they sound like they're the same, but not quite. So reflection is something that's part of, for those of us who are speech language hearing scientists or clinicians or students. Part of our discipline is to be self reflective. That's like looking at yourself in a mirror and trying to determine how things can be better for the next time, right? So you're looking at your this reflection, you're looking at yourself, you're examining yourself, which is good. And that's great. And we want to do that. But I think almost everybody does that, right? So critical self reflexivity is taking that a step further where you are examining your contribution to unequal power relations. You're looking at the power relations that are inherent in a particular interaction or relationship, and you are being reflexive. So you are trying, the goal is to mitigate or dismantle those that unequal power, even in your clinic classroom. And that takes this constant review of what is your what what's the power imbalance in this relationship. So you're in the school, let's just say, and you walk down to someone's classroom. Okay, and you walk into the classroom. What is the power relationship? Oh, I have a very good example.
Thank you.
All
Please.
of my work in preschools were inside the classrooms,
Hmm.
right? And so um, when I was working in the classrooms, I remember one time this preschool I was working in Philadelphia, the teachers were really wary of me because I wasn't coming in and pulling kids out. Wanted to work in the classroom, and some teachers were open and some teachers weren't. If they weren't, that was perfectly fine with me. Um, but just my presence in the classroom made some of the teachers uncomfortable because that shifted the power balance, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was a doc student, so I was a student, but what they saw was speech language pathologist,
Hmm.
right? And they saw someone who was coming in the classroom to the interpretation was to assess them in some way.
Hmm.
Um, what I eventually the light clicked on um, was that I need to be part of the classroom, not someone coming into the classroom.
Hmm.
So what did I do? Serve lunch, change diapers. I took the kids to the bathroom. I cleaned off tables. I was just a presence, another person working alongside the teachers in the classroom. And that went on for a while to build trust. That was always my method, right? To go in and try to equalize that, try to undo that power differential so that we could have a conversation as peers where I could learn from the teacher, but the teacher could also felt comfortable learning from me too.
Hmm.
So there was this bidirectional exchange. And so this critical self-reflexivity is that constant evaluation of what's the power differential here and how can I eliminate it? Which I really believe is it's a framework for ethical practice. It's also a framework for equity, a framework for inclusion, and a framework for because it helps us be really concerned about the equity in that context and making ourselves smaller. That's probably not a good word to use, but making ourselves be able to be more
Balanced and
balanced, yeah,
harmonious.
and
Okay.
equal,
Yes.
not diminishing who we are, what we bring, but also supporting and uplifting with our partners also bring, right?
Yes.
Because we can learn from them, and we have a lot to learn from a lot of people, right? I'm not a classroom teacher. Did I do a what do you call it? Teacher when you're in school and you go into the classroom and you student teaching. Yeah,
Mhm,
I did
mhm.
student teaching, I did lesson plans, I did all but I'm not a classroom teacher. Who's the
Yes,
expert in the classroom? Not me,
right.
right? So I'm learning you put you that's also where cultural humility comes in, right? Because you're putting yourself in this position of being able to learn from others. And people can sense when you have that humility and you're open to learning, and when you come in hot, like,
Mhm,
like I have it, I know it all, right? That doesn't set up a good collaborative relationship. I also think, like in the words that we use, so if I'm referring to the people I'm working with as my client, or as my patient. I I'm sorry, my face gave myself away, but I should have made that face. But if I'm referring to the people that I'm working with using those terms that we use so often, um, it's just harder to think of them as a collaborative partner,
mm,
right? So, but if we call them a care partner or a collaborator or my partner, then it's easier to make that leap. I mean, to
mm.
bridge that gap. And all of that goes into this critical self-reflexivity and trying to what's the power relationship, and make it how do we dismantle that unequal power and make it more equal?
Thank you so much. One thing that this made me think about is, I was actually speaking to parents of Belize who have children with disabilities, and
Mhm.
I wanted to more so empower them to understand how speech pathologists can take on the role of culture responsive clinicians, and green flags to look out for, as well as red flags or where we miss the mark.
Mhm.
And one thing that I really wanted them to walk away with is that they are a collaborator.
Mhm.
And yes, we are knowledgeable in the field, but they are knowledgeable in their house. They're the experts of their house, of their own culture. We don't know a thing when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for just mentioning how your moments in that classroom, you probably sensed that fear or that intimidation factor, and you met them where they were. Where they were, you acknowledged it. That was your self awareness. This is me also learning and just repeating
Right.
it back to you,
Sure.
right?
Uh-huh.
That was your self awareness. You came into the classroom, you knew what they were probably thinking, and you're like, how can I make this more harmonious and dismantle that power? So that was a
Exactly.
fabulous example. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I
Yes.
like that. What did you say? The
Green
green
flags.
flags. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Green flags to look for because, it's how they build trust. And I think that the biggest thing is if you know what to look out for, and if that doctor, that therapist, et cetera, if they're checking those boxes, then you know how to feel safe, just like with any other relationship.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes. So, one final question for you, Dr. Hyder.
Mhm.
What changes would you like to see in the field?
Ooh. I would, if I had my, what do you call the magic box or whatever, if I could
Mhm.
wave
A
the
magic
magic
wand.
wand,
Yes.
I would have speech language hearing sciences moving to the left, closer to a more, a critical social framework. And right now, we're pretty steeped in positivism. Now that word
Mm,
may not mean very much, but if you think about the behaviorism that you learn in Psych 101, that we often use in speech therapy rooms, where we collect data, we if we can observe it, then it is measurable, and then it's meaningful. That there's such thing as being objective. I don't believe that, but
mm,
you know, in that science framework, the positivism science framework, people who are proponents of that believe um, that things are measurable, and if they're observable, then they're measurable, and then they can be objectified and be true, and that's somehow truth. Um, in the critical science perspective, there's this. I mentioned some of the premises before in terms of that there's always this sense of conflict, right? But there's also other premises that history is important, that you can't figure out what's happening today. You can't understand today unless you understand the history. So if you think about the discipline, you can't really understand why we do the things that we do in speech language hearing sciences unless you study how speech language hearing sciences came about, what time it came about, what else was going on in the world at that time. And another premise of critical science is that knowledge is not value free. So that, the way the way a scientist might interpret the data that they have is not objective. It's very much influenced by that scientist's background or history or the way that they see the world. Um, so there are other premises, of course, like well, there's several, but those are some of the ideas. But the point, so if I had the magic wand, we'd be moving more over to that way of thinking as opposed to focus on the positivism science, which typically people think about as being science, but it's all science.
Could you, and just really quickly, could you explain what positivism science is as opposed to the other framework?
Yeah, so positivism is a form of science that um where it has these premises or they've been, ways of thinking about the world. So that knowledge is value free. So you can know some things and it's objective. That's a premise.
Mm, mhm,
Which is why when you read all the journal articles and, with quantitative data, people put a lot of stock in that. The people put a lot of stock also in the GRE scores, for example, because it's quantitative data. Somehow it's telling the truth in
mm,
the mind of a positivist. It's telling the truth about some person's capabilities or abilities,
mm,
right? Um, the critical science, though, would see that as um, not as the final truth, for example, because it's all interpretable based on, like, whatever I bring, I might interpret the results differently,
mhm.
even though it's quantitative data. Another premise of positivism is that the truth is out there. We just need to go and discover it, right? So we have
Mhm,
these ways of asking that we can discover what the truth is and that there is this one truth. And it's based on these very distinct um, uh, properties that um, so your personal opinion, your social situation doesn't come into play. That if you did poorly on that test, poorly,
right.
then you did poorly because you don't have the ability, that's the truth. When a critical social scientist would say, well, what's the context? What's the history? What's the, so the score doesn't necessarily tell the story,
Right.
right? It's not objective and it's not value free. It's connected to what we value, what people value, or what people are perceiving about a person who might have that particular score. Does that
It
help you?
does.
Okay.
It does. It does. Things that come in my mind is, of course, that saying, not to look at things black and white, but gray.
Right. Yeah.
And then also in dynamic assessment, that's where we can potentially either practice positivism, which would mean not considering the child as a whole or the person as a whole, in critical.
Critical social science or
Critical
critical
social science.
science. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I didn't ask you to help us understand how we can critically think today, but I do not want to take up too much of your time. Can I please ask you off air and share the response with the audience?
Sure. Sure. Yes.
Unless, do you have a little extra time today, about 5 more minutes to discuss this?
Well, let me give it some thought, and then let's do it off air so I can
I love
make sure
that.
that, yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Hyder. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work? And I mean, really, I want to brag about you. Okay. So, where's your LinkedIn? Where can we find you?
LinkedIn. Well, you asked me earlier if I had an Instagram account, and I said maybe, or I'm not sure.
You said maybe.
That's how I am with regard to the social media. So I don't know my Instagram account link, my LinkedIn account name either. I don't know what
Okay.
name it is. I just know I have one, and I'm more active there. I'm probably leaving Facebook. But I have an email address, which can be shared. I think you have that email address. And so those are the places that people can find me on LinkedIn and in my email addresses.
Beautiful.
There's a work email, Hyter, PhD at languageliteracypractices.com, and a personal, Yvette.Hyter at gmail.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Hyder. And for those watching the replay and those watching live, I will go ahead and put that contact information in the show notes for them.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for coming to the show, and we will see you next time. Thank you, Dr. Hyder, for your time.
You're welcome.